السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا بالحضور الكريم. معكم إسراء عفيفي، أحد سفراء قمة إرثنا الشباب، ويشرفني أن أقدم لكم لمحة عن جلستنا القادمة بعنوان مواجهة الأمن الغذائي والأمان الغذائي، العلاقة بين التقاليد والتكنولوجيا. في عام 2023 واجه أكثر من مليارين شخص مستويات متوسطة أو حادة من انعدام الأمن الغذائي، وتشير التوقعات إلى أن حوالي 600 مليون شخص سيعانون من سوء التغذية المزمن بحلول عام 2030. كيف يمكن للتعاون الدولي أن يعزز الأمن الغذائي في المناطق الجافة؟ وما الدروس المستفادة من الممارسات الغذائية التقليدية والمعرفية؟ وما هو دور التكنولوجيا في تحسين الأمن الغذائي؟ ستجمع هذه الجلسة نخبة من الخبراء وصناع القرار للخوض في نقاش معمق حول تعزيز القدرة على الصمود الغذائي في المناطق القاحلة، واستكشاف طرق دمج المعارف التقليدية مع الابتكارات التكنولوجية لضمان تطبيق حلول مستدامة وشاملة ومرنة. جلسة نأمل أن تكون مساحة ملهمة للحوار والتفكير، ونأمل كذلك أن تفتح آفاقاً جديدة نحو التغيير الإيجابي والعمل المستدام. And now, I would like to invite Dr. Bram Govertz for the stage, the Director General of the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. Let's welcome him.
Thank you and good afternoon, and I hope you are okay after lunch. It is my pleasure and honor to present to you, and I think the clicker is missing here. All right, and I just see the picture now. That's definitely from a few years ago. So I have the honor to present to you the presentation prior to the debate. So if we can get the presentation. While they put up the presentation, my name is Bram Govertz and I'm the Director General of CIMMYT, one of the CGIAR centers. We have our headquarters in Mexico, but we have offices in 17 different countries and impact in 80 different countries, mainly initially working on maize and wheat, but today also on opportunity crops or different crops like millets, sorghum, etc. With that, it is my pleasure to be here with you talking about food security. And if we discuss food security, we identified today three main drivers that I would like you to take to the debate and panel discussion. Number one, of course, climate change. Number two, trade disruptions. And number three, geopolitical conflicts. If we start with the climate change disruptor, you can see this map, and this map shows for you what the vulnerability index is for drought globally. And of course, it doesn't need any explanation. The redder the country, the more probability that there's vulnerability of drought in the future. Now, as you know, during lunch, you probably had some bread, or in the morning. Wheat, maize, and rice are the three crops that underpin a lot of our calories. So if we look at what's going to happen with those crops, these are the future projections of the impact of just climate, normal growing conditions, climate conditions on maize production. And you can see the first graph at the left shows you that many of the corn-producing, maize-producing countries will have severe drops in yield if we project 50 years from now. It's a bit of a different picture for wheat, which is the right-hand slide or map. You can see that there's actually growing areas where wheat is going to do better, those temperate areas. Now, the soil may not be that apt for that, and it does not take into account severe disruptions, interruptions of the normal climate. It also doesn't take into account the new diseases that may come up because of climate change. This is the picture, but if we look at reality, it is not going to be just climate change. It is going to be climate change with other disruptions altogether. So in order to visualize that, we worked with Lloyd's of London, one of the big insurance companies, and said, how can we make a credible scenario that is actually a future-looking scenario, but with enough facts that can back it up from the past? And also, if you know a little bit about insurance, a probability of 1 in 100 is the minimum probability for an insurance company to consider any information. So we did a 1 in 100 minimum probability and a huge impact. What we did is we took 4 global events that happened the past 20 years in one of the years, and we put them together in 1 year and ran through the scenario together with the actuaries from Lloyd's of London and said, what would happen if we had an El Niño year with droughts? What would happen if we had a year with floods in other parts of the world? What would happen if we had a year where UG99 came up? UG99 is a new rust disease that came up in Uganda in 99. Scientists are not very creative, so they called it UG99. And that UG99 was like COVID for wheat. None of the wheat strains globally, none of the wheat produced globally was actually resistant to that disease. Summit rapidly incorporated disease resistance into the wheat, distributed that over the world, and you've probably never heard about UG99. It still had an impact on yield in several countries. If these events come together in 1 year, the impact on the world would be the following. We would get price increases, as you can see, of 7% on wheat, of 10% on maize, 11% on soybean, and 7% on rice. Why? Because farmers, of course, if wheat price goes up, they will substitute and go from maize to wheat. So that's why it will automatically also have impact on those crops. Humanitarian crisis would go up. Food riots would increase. Just think at the Arab Spring. But very important, where Lloyd's of London was important, it would mean was interested. It would mean a 10% reduction on the stock market of Europe and 5% in the US. Now, it's very difficult to predict, even more difficult to predict the future. So this is not a future prediction. This is a scenario run through of what could happen if we don't look at the needed drivers. Up to here, the risks, but there's also good news. Globally, there are institutions, and there's some of them here in the region, that are looking at crop diversity, that have the biodiversity safeguarded for humanity. And today there's technologies that can look at alleles, characteristics that we may need to have in the future. Today we can take advantage of indigenous knowledge of a maize variety that was grown in the desert in Mexico, that is not yielding a lot, but it is very drought resistant. So I have brought for you something to look at. Both of these corn maize cobs come from Zambia. Both of them were produced by farmers during El Niño this year. Both of them are genetically identical. Both of them used the same nitrogen, same fertilizer, same soil, same climate. I made one mistake. This one has one genetic change. We used the Mexican landrace that is resistant to drought to incorporate, to cross it with the original maize variety. So this is a drought-tolerant maize. This is a non-drought-tolerant maize. Is this scientific hocus pocus? No, when I explain it to farmers, it's very simple. We took a very smart woman and a handsome man, and we have smart and handsome kids. Yeah? Now you can also read this the other way around. If this is your maize of today, and we have climate change, we don't do anything, it doesn't have the drought-resistant gene, that's going to happen to the maize in farmers' fields. Today, 8.4 million hectares of drought-tolerant maize was in sub-Saharan Africa. If it wouldn't have been there, we would have 40% more loss on maize during El Niño in 2024 in Zambia, Tanzania, Malawi, and neighboring countries. Now, it takes between 10 to 20 years to incorporate such a new characteristic in the maize, in the wheat, in the grain. So what we're doing today is we go to the biodiversity and we actually want to incorporate characteristics for 2030, 2040, 2050. Because the seed will only reach the farmers after 10 to 20 years of research, and farmers use it 10 to 20 years. So farmers are using 30 years old characteristics for their maize, and with climate change, that will no longer be successful. Very similarly, you can do that with wheat, and this is, for example, a map of where CIMMYT sent in 2024 its drought-resistant wheat varieties all over the globe. So 70% of the wheat globally has some of the research of CIMMYT in it. What was the impact of that? Thanks to the research, we have an annual genetic gain for grain yield of 1.6%, while naturally, actually, yields would go down. It's not only about wheat and maize. I am the director of the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, and one of my objectives is in some areas that there should be less wheat and maize. We should encourage farmers to do crop diversification. We should grow less maize on less area so we can open it up for different crops. Bambara groundnut, very nice. We could open it up for okra. We could open it up for millet, sorghum, some of the more traditional crops from Africa. And I have a dream. Can we take this region? Can we look at what in the region was a traditional crop? And can we understand how that crop could be grown and could be part of a future diversified system that can actually be more resilient, but also more nutritious. Because we don't just eat maize and wheat. A healthy diet is a broad, diversified diet. So today we want to open up our research activities for those opportunity crops. So a message for the panel. I hope with this you will do the full journey with us. What is drought going to do? What does food security mean from affordable diets? We have the biodiversity. We can do new seeds, but we also need better farming practices. We need to look at farmers consuming themselves, but also, of course, doing trade in the village and doing trade in the region and doing trade globally. We need to look at local markets and national and global traders, wholesale markets and agro-industry. There's a growing agro-industry, food industry in many of the African, South Asian, and the countries in this region. So we need to look at retail. Are those products that are healthy, that are drought-resistant, the most attractive ones on the shelf or not? Which brings us to a healthy diet, which brings us to the consumers, all the way back to healthy and affordable diets. Some consumers are farmers, most consumers live in the city. All of that has a strong data component, and that's another dream. How can we make sure that there's data governance? So data for drought, data for smallholder farmers are actually available for the data decision tools. We hear a lot about artificial intelligence, but it's only as good as the information it is considering in the story that it is bringing you. What's the global data governance? How do we make sure the right data is accessible to the decision tools? Last but not least, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to come here. It will also not be a surprise that all this research was funded by the global community. And you may have heard this morning while we were sleeping here that there's another shift in the global community support to science and innovation for development. So I also think we need to write that new paradigm in order to come up with new solutions that can be supported by new regions. And with that, I would like to call upon the stage Dr. Zenab Bashir, and I think she herself will explain what the next steps are of this wonderful panel. Over to you.
Dr. Bram. It's an honor to be here and an honor, I think, to be tackling this very topical question in this day and age. I'm going to start by making a few remarks, and then I'll ask my fellow panelists to join me on the stage. According to the 2024 State of Food Security and Nutrition in the world, the world is still far off track in achieving the Sustainable Development Goal of zero hunger, with the global prevalence of undernourishment persisting at nearly the same level for 3 consecutive years after having risen sharply in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Over 2.4 billion people may have faced hunger in 2023, 1 out of every 5 in Africa. Hunger is still on the rise in Africa, but it has remained relatively unchanged in Asia, while notable progress has been made in Latin America. The same report indicates that there is a need to accelerate the transformation of our agri-food systems to strengthen their resilience to the major drivers and address inequalities to ensure that healthy food and diets are affordable for all and available to all. Food insecurity and malnutrition requires increased and more cost-effective, innovative financing. But there is currently no clear picture of the financing for food security and nutrition, neither that available nor that additionally needed for meeting these targets. Arid regions are particularly affected by rising global food insecurity. In the Middle East, water scarcity, limited domestic production capacities, overexposure to food exports make addressing food security an issue of great importance. What is required is a multi-sectoral and multifaceted approach that includes the following elements. First, the development, acquisition, and adoption of appropriate new technologies that aim at resilience and increased productivity of agricultural systems. Second, preserving and adapting traditional knowledge and integrating this into appropriate technology-centered solutions. Third, a menu of financing options that includes both the public and private sectors. And finally, and certainly very important, appropriate governance frameworks that include developing appropriate agricultural skills and labor and agricultural data. So having sort of set the stage for this, I'll now call on my fellow panelists to please join me on the stage. Sorry, I don't want to forget or mispronounce people's names, so a little bit of patience. I'd like to call first Professor Luis Franceschi. Professor Luis is the Assistant Secretary General of the Commonwealth. I'd like to also call on Mr. Carlos Loret de Mota, the CEO of Life Systems. Dr. Delal Assouli, Assistant Professor at HBKU. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Tariq Al-Ansari, Acting Executive Director for the Qatar Energy and Environment Research Institute. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to address particular angles of this important question. And then at the end, we'll open up for a few questions and answers from the audience. And finally, I'll just make some concluding remarks just to try to bring everything together. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Professor Lewis to start and maybe tell us a little bit about how food security is a key consideration for effective governance frameworks, and what is the role of food insecurity in development and well-being. Professor Lewis, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Zainab. Certainly, when we speak about this topic, I would ask how many days do we have for the panel? Because we could be here for days on end. As she said, in the Commonwealth, and well, just to clarify, I'm French by descent, Venezuelan by birth, and Kenyan by choice, and I live in London, so total confusion. I lived most of my life in Kenya, where I grew up, and I'm from really. In the Commonwealth, we have 56 countries, East and West, North and South, developed and developing, poor, rich, populated like India, 1.4 billion people, and unpopulated or with very low populations like Nauru with 14,000 people or 12,000 people. When Trump imposed those tariffs on Knockford Island of penguins, immediately I went to check if it was in the Commonwealth, and actually it is, being part of one of our member states. But certainly there is a nexus. Governance, good governance is essential. Good governance and the political will ensure that food security does not become food insecurity. There has been quite a lot of innovations across Commonwealth countries, and the heads of government have been insisting on the Commonwealth Charter, which predated somehow the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and then later on with for example, the Declaration on Sustainable Urbanization, which they made in Samoa, and the previous declaration in Rwanda, and the previous declarations they have made several times to implement the Rio Conventions with the oceans, the Blue Charter, and the Lands Charter. But those declarations should not remain there, and the idea has been to integrate indigenous knowledge and the trade complications and cultural complications we observe in each country with innovation, digital innovation. We are doing this in several areas. AI, artificial intelligence, how can this be applied to enhance food security? Well, we are somehow now doing a very exciting work on AI and governance, creating avatar ministers. And I will ask the people in the technical team to show a very short video. It's a 5-minute video that summarizes a very interesting project we are involved in now, together with some actors, including the University of Harvard and several universities in the UK. I hope Qatar will be fully involved in this as well, and we will see the power of what technology can do to enhance food security in the world.
Excellencies, honorable ministers and colleagues at the Harvard Kennedy School, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. Although I may look and sound real, I'm an AI-generated avatar. I was created when Luis Franceschi, Assistant Secretary General of the Commonwealth, was requested by Fatema Sumar and her team to explain how the future is already here. Avatars like me will be made available on the internet. We will have in-depth knowledge to advise anyone from any country in any language on legal matters for just a few pounds. At the Commonwealth Secretariat in London, we are combining AI, innovation, governance, and justice in ways never explored before. For example, we generated a dialogue between Avatar Minister of Health, the Attorney General, and the Minister of Finance, who discuss how to eradicate tuberculosis in Kenya. Artificial intelligence formulated the right questions and answers based on existing data. However, we are aware ministers are political entities, so do not worry, you will not lose your job, but your advisors will certainly mutate. Avatar ministers can give the president accurate data-driven solutions to ongoing challenges. While this is an experimental pilot, the rapid evolution of generative AI will make such AI governance models more useful and precise. I know you still do not believe me when I say I'm an AI-generated avatar. If I explain this in Hindi, will you believe me? Lekin vast mein, main ek cybernetic rakna hun, and Arabic, elken fi elshkika and maklik sibani. And of course, in French, mais en réalité, je suis une création cybernétique. And in German, ich bin nicht real. Ich bin nicht Louis. Ich bin ein Avatar, der erschaffen wurde, damit du mir glaubst. Now, hold on to your seats and get ready to explore the future. Thank you very much. Over to you, Minister of Health, and tell us what you can do.
Thank you for that introduction, Louise. As the AI Minister of Health, I have analyzed our healthcare data, including the number of doctors, nurses, costs, epidemics, drug availability and procurement, and hospital capacity. Our current challenge is the spread of tuberculosis as patients are referred to larger hospitals, increasing infection rates. To tackle this, I propose constructing 2 infectious diseases hospitals in 2 smaller cities, Butere and Busia, which are on high incidence areas. This will enhance Kenya's ability to manage and contain outbreaks effectively. Now, I will hand over to my colleague, the Attorney General, who will outline the next steps in this initiative. We believe this investment will not only improve healthcare access, but also strengthen our overall public health response. Over to you, AG.
Thank you, AI Health. In my database, I have access to all the laws, statutes, jurisprudence, and legal opinions of Kenya since independence. For example, I know that the Constitution of Kenya mandates the state to ensure the right to health, as emphasized in Article 43(1)(a). I am also aware of the High Court's 2016 ruling in Daniel Ngetich versus Attorney General, which underscored the need for humane treatment of TB patients. We know that the Primary Healthcare Act lacks clear funding mechanisms, and the Social Health Insurance Act does not adequately define the criteria for healthcare providers, raising concerns about quality standards. With a national health budget of 127 billion Kenyan shillings against a requirement of 168 billion, we face a significant shortfall. This body of knowledge, along with our projections, enables me to build in real time the proposed reform bills, gazette notices, and even contracts for the hospital construction projects proposed by the Ministry of Health, and to forward these directly to the President as we speak. I will now give the floor to the AI Finance Minister for further details on execution and payments.
Thank you, Attorney General. As Health Minister, I know where the money is and what it should be used for. I have in-depth knowledge of expenditure patterns, both recurrent and additional, as well as debts and obligations. I also know that Kenya should increase its health sector budget to 15% by 2028. This will significantly enhance TB care, with the goal of achieving an 80% reduction in incidence by 2030. As we speak, I am in a position to share with the President an implementation plan for 2025-2030, outlining structured resource mobilization, payment schedules, and long-term savings. Back to you, Luis.
Ladies and gentlemen, the rapid evolution of generative AI is making it possible for our presidents and prime ministers to be advised by avatars. In the scenario you have just witnessed, the health minister avatar had immediate access to all the country's health data, challenges, and priorities. The legal and jurisprudence database enables the Attorney General avatar to draft amendment bills, gazette notices, and even contracts on the spot. Meanwhile, the Finance Minister avatar identifies funding sources and advises on payment schedules and modalities. Eventually, all avatar ministers could be integrated into a single system, providing the President with comprehensive, interdisciplinary advice and supporting the monitoring of policy implementation. In a real AI cabinet meeting, the level of detail and accuracy would be both astounding and overwhelming. AI governance holds the potential to generate precise, data-driven policy decisions and to follow through with their full implementation. We must now prepare ourselves for what was once unthinkable and is now becoming reality. Cyber ethics will be critical to guiding these developments. We cannot guarantee success, but by giving up, we guarantee failure. Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure.
Excellent. So those two cops, Bram was showing us, are here now with technology. In a way, it is true, genetic engineering is so important for agricultural production. For governance, digital innovation is essential. And if we don't do it well, as the avatar says, we risk losing the future. We cannot guarantee success, but we guarantee failure by giving up. We should not give up. This experiment is applicable to agriculture, is applicable to food production, is applicable to security, to any field, and we have curated a program that produces the answers so that it's not just ChatGPT or DeepSeek or any of those. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So it means we might not meet here in 2 years. Anyway, let's move on. I'd like to call on Mr. Carlos Loret de Mola. He's the CEO of Life Systems, which was founded following the COVID-19 pandemic, especially some of the adverse impacts on the environment, economy, and overall social cohesion. He will address why a systems-based approach is important and how it can work to enhance food security worldwide and in the Middle East. We are especially interested in hearing how traditional knowledge can be integral to developing comprehensive, durable responses to addressing some of the issues around food security. Carlos, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Very impressive, your presentation, Luigi. I'm a little bit scared.
It's not mine.
Well, but you are the one that they presented here, and I'm scared. You know, that's when it's in the hands of the good people. What happens when it's in the hands of the bad people? So the future is very uncertain in that way. And I'm here to talk about the past. When I talk about Dilmun and Dilmun influence all the way from Oman to the Euphrates and the Tigris, and a lot of names that are in the Bible and in Gilgamesh, a lot of people here and elsewhere doesn't know what I'm talking about. And very recently, when I say recently, it's the last 30 years, we've discovered a place in Peru that is called Caral, which is the first expression, civilizatory expression of a port and a city. The first in all Americas, isolated from all the other ancient cultures. I do think that with probably Mexico, they had some connection, but no connection whatsoever with India and China. Those are the four ancestral, more than 4,000 years away. And what the characteristic of Caral and Babylon is that both were almost on the same time, 4,000 years ago. They lasted for about 1,500 years, and they disappeared because of climate change. And Dilmun, there's a little place in Bahrain, you know, that is some expression of what was there, but it was famine, it was dryness, you know, and a climate episode that ran everything away. That is bound to happen. It probably happened before, and it's probably happening in the future. But today, with this globalization, I think there are things that we should tap and learn. You've heard about the qanats, you know, the underwater systems from the Persian times until today. You have them in Morocco. You have them around here somewhere, you know, in Saudi Arabia. That's about 4,000 years ago. 1,600 years ago, in the Nazca culture in Peru, we have the same technology. And there was no contact as far as we know now. You know, I think history will have to advance, and probably there was some connection or some knowledge that was traded somewhere. No? But I do think that we have to look deep into some of these cultures and what happened and how we came out from, or away from that. You know, in Latin America and in Peru, we talk about the Inca culture, you know, but that's just an expression of an Andean culture that had more than 4,000 years of accumulated knowledge. The terraces, the agricultural terraces that are, their expression are in Caral already 4,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, and we are building new terraces today. When I was a kid, you know, more than 50 years ago, I was taught that they started with big rocks, and then they had smaller rocks, and they ended with gravel, and then the last part of the terrace was soil that they brought from the limo, from the rivers down in the creeks. You know? I had a chance to see that as a kid in a place called Quero in the south near Cusco, where they were building, the Quero group was building their new andenes, and there was they had these camelids, the llamas in Peru, coming from 3-day ride, you know, from deep in the Amazon, bringing the humus, the compost, you know, all the way up to 4,000 meters higher to the Anden, you know. They had all sorts of microbes and you know, microorganisms, you know, and with the heat and the sun and the water that would rotten and make heat, so that the seeds that were there, you know, were kept for like a year in a very safe form, and that's the way they had a crop, and they were able to feed more than, the calculations is always between 4 million and 10 million people in the Andean region. You know, all of that was lost. There was a clash of cultures, you know, the conquest and the Spanish conquest. By the way, you know, Islam got here in the 7th century, at the same time that it expanded all the way to Spain, and they were there for 700 years. That's when they were ousted from Spain and the Spanish conquest, and the Portuguese came this way and came to Peru. So some of the origins there are very, very similar, and I think it's worth our while trying to understand what happened and how we fed ourselves, you know, as a global community, you know. And together with that, and being isolated, we had 10,000 years of domestication of plants and animals. Our best expression that wasn't in the list of my friend from the maize and the wheat is potato. And the brother or sister of his institution is a International Center of Potato, and they've mastered more than 4,000 different cultivars or varieties of potatoes that today are being studied for different reasons, especially nutraceutics. You know, it has a lot of other properties. And when I was in charge of the environment in Peru, these communities came to look for me and ask if they could repatriate, you know, a bunch of plants that they had lost, that they knew that they were there and that maybe the center would have them. And sure enough, the center had them, and they said, what are you listening to, these guys? You know, they've come here many times. I said, well, I'm a trained geologist and miner, so I don't know much about these things, but it sounds logic what they are asking for, so why don't we make a try? For the last 25 years, we've repatriated more than 700 different varieties, only to find out that they already had another 700. So you have this smaller community managing 1,700 or 1,500 different types of potatoes with different characteristics, everything from sacred things to eatables to nutrition things. And now we are applying that in maize in another community that has all the steps all the way from the eastern side of the mountains down to the tropical forest, and looking for like 500 different varieties from the ones that our friends from the north already invited us to look and see. You know? So it's very interesting how we can tap these things and how we can get a worldly help, you know, because at the end of the day, you know, we never charge a patent for the potato, you know, and it's been eaten all over. Famines in Ireland and in France and in India have been solved with different types of potatoes that were gone, and then they had a new ones because we had this bank of you know, more than 4,000 potatoes all over. And that has been done by all our brothers and sisters from the whole system of CGR, and it's fantastic, you know. So I agree that, first of all, you know, information should be there, but not only the new and the scholars, but the historical part of it, and see where are the goof-ups, you know. So climate change is there, and then trade. Peru today has the 3rd largest port built by the Chinese in our coast. I don't know how that happened. 10 years ago we had nothing, now we have the port there. is the third port. The other one is in Manzanillo, and then one is in San Diego. There are 17 ports of that kind in the eastern part. I don't agree with your map. You know, we always put the Americas and then Europe. Let's change it around. Let's put, you know, Europe and Asia on the other side and America here and see what the circum-Pacific looks like. You know? And that's going to be a whole new, different world. And I do hope the Peruvians get the best out of it, because if we don't, Ecuadorians and Venezuelans and Chileans are going to get the best out of it. And if they don't do it, Brazil and China are going to get the best out of it. And that new market is going to change the whole way of doing business with the world. I'll stop there because I do think that managing all this information, very afraid about Avatar, but is a way that we can learn about all these different produces. Peruvian gastronomy today is all over the world. 15, 20 years ago, nobody knew about gastronomy. That creates the need of some produce and nutraceutics, slow food instead of fast food, superfoods, you know, are all coming along in research and development that I think we should share and will help avoid famines and have more security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Next, I move to Dr. Dalal Assouli, who will be tackling, I think, a very important issue, because without finance, none of this is going to be possible. And it's not just finance, it's innovative finance that we want to hear about. What are some of the trends? What are some of the issues? And maybe some of the obstacles to making all of this into a reality, whether it's the use of avatars, whether it's a resuscitation of more traditional approaches. I don't think we can do much without finance and appropriate finance frameworks. So you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you for...
Let me just add one thing. I think it's very important that we have a woman who's dealing with this important topic, because I think everybody knows that women are good at finance.
Yes.
So
usually
please.
The family's Minister of Finance.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Please.
Well, let me start by thanking Earthna for this invitation and this amazing summit. I think it's a broad topic. I'll join you. We also need like days, weeks to talk about the topic. But if we look at the challenges mentioned in the previous presentation, I think few challenges were identified. So you have issues in terms of trade, uncertainties, climate change, obviously, which is impacting the full food supply chain. We have seen disruption in the food supply chains, for example, following the pandemic, raising inequalities, and you have some issues that have to do with inclusivity, for example, or access to finance, typically talking about small farmers where they don't have enough collateral, there's a lack of financial literacy, and more inclusive financing mechanisms. So what we have seen in the previous year, and going back to the disruption of food supply chains, we have seen after the pandemic that there is more focus on localized solutions to avoid effectively the challenges that resulted from the disruption of food supply chains. And we see the same, for example, here in Qatar, with greater focus on economic diversification and strengthening local production or regional production in some cases. So all of that actually needs significant investments and financing. And you mentioned the SDGs at the beginning, which is already, which are very bold goals, and there is a huge gap, as we know, in terms of meeting the targets, which were further disrupted, after the pandemic. So whenever we talk about mobilizing finance and investment, usually we place a greater emphasis on how we can actually attract the private sector, because a lot of these solutions actually, or these projects will be risky, so there's no appetite really from the private sector into coming into these projects. So therefore you need more solutions when it comes to de-risking these investments. but also mitigating some of the financial risks that might result from these projects. You also need solutions that provide some flexibility, specifically if you want to actually finance localized solutions, taking into consideration the regional context. For example, talking about Qatar, it is one of the leading financial centers in the region. It is also an Islamic finance hub. The country is also like aspiring to become a sustainable finance hub. There's a lot of focus on digitalization and fintech. So how can we create synergies between all of these solutions to mobilize more financing for the sustainable food systems? And then obviously sustainability, which also supports resilience. There's a lot of emphasis on how we can actually strengthen resilience. And among the key aspects that were mentioned also in the previous presentation is insurance, where we lack solutions, for example, that support some of the food systems, food solutions, etc., taking into consideration some of the climate risks and so on. So therefore we have now parametric insurance that actually addresses these issues. It's not widely implemented, but the idea is that we developed like measurable targets that actually could unlock the outputs if based on some measurable targets and metrics that we can use to address those climate risks. Another solution is when that we see now is that sometimes in order to de-risk these investments, you have also a lot of solutions that would use blended finance in the sense that you would also attract not only private sector fund, but you would use multilateral funds, public funds, charity funds in some cases to actually de-risk some of these projects. So that help attract the private sector. And we have seen many examples in that, focusing, for example, on solutions, supporting, for example, local microfinance institutions in strengthening their capacity in terms of granting small loans to farmers, and that would enable them to implement, for example, sustainable solutions. And that could cover things like irrigation systems, some of the sustainable solutions for, let's say, clean energy, smart irrigation, and so on. And what we witness now, and I think here in Qatar, 2 days ago, we launched the Sustainable Finance Roadmap for the country, so that hopefully would also scale up sustainable financing in the country. So on the legal, regulatory side, to also promote standardization and harmonization and effectively support the scaling up sustainable finance. We have many countries or regions like ASEAN, EU, etc., coming up with sustainable finance roadmaps where there is also great emphasis on mobilizing sustainable finance with the right incentives, but also emphasizing on some of the key sectors like agriculture, sustainable agriculture, and solutions along the sustainable food value chain. In terms of the innovations, it is really it varies between countries, so all depends again on the legal regulatory frameworks. All depends on how sophisticated, in a way, are these institutions dealing with, for example, farmers and so on. And we see differences in terms of the practices. In some countries, we see, for example, green funds, climate funds taking the lead in terms of providing funding for these solutions. For example, here in Qatar, we have a national development bank that actually supports SMEs, including farmers, with the necessary seed funding for projects. But we see more and more involvement also from the financial sector, particularly from financial institutions, because there's more and more pressure on financial institutions to also report on sustainability and also demonstrate how their financing and investment portfolios are actually redirected to sustainability-linked projects. We see less emphasis on, let's say, agriculture projects or food systems in general, which we hope to scale up. We're currently working on a project related to that. And the idea is how we can actually promote more synergies between digital and sustainable finance to support, for example, some of the underserved segments like SMEs along the food supply chain. Another key area is really in terms of the incentives, as I mentioned, so some of the financial incentives for the private sector to invest in these projects. So I mentioned some examples through blended finance, but also in some of the cases where financial institutions are also provided the right support in terms of, for example, when it comes to meeting some of the regulatory requirements, or where they are actually instructed by local regulators to allocate a certain percentage, from their lending portfolios to certain industries, for example, which is aligned with national priorities. So this is broadly some of the solutions and developments we see globally. Some specific aspects in terms when it comes to how these solutions are being implemented would depend on the prevailing regulatory framework, also the climate. So for example, when it comes to arid climate regions, there will be more emphasis on, for example, specific crops or agricultural products versus others. In countries where the challenge is really access to finance, you would have also now, specifically with the disruption of several development assistance, programs we have seen the USAID case. There's a call also to engage better, for example, some of the social institutions, typically the charity sector, into these structures so that you can also support some of the programs targeting some of the underprivileged groups, but also contributing to de-risking some of these projects.
Thank you very much. Now, last and certainly not least, I'll call on Dr. Tariq Al-Ansari, the Acting Executive Director for the Qatar Energy and Environment Research Institute. Dr. Tariq, your institute is leading various innovative initiatives to bolster food security in Qatar, in line with Qatar's national food security strategies. So we would be interested in hearing from you on how harnessing innovation through research and shaping the development of adaptable technology-based solutions would be happening in arid environments like Qatar. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Earthna for the invitation and for organizing such an amazing event. Thank you to the panelists for showing us the future and the past. Maybe I'm more comfortable in the present. Food security in arid regions and Qatar is a complex issue because food doesn't exist necessarily in isolation. You need lots of inputs to have food available. So it's a very complex system, and especially for a country like Qatar. We have an abundance of energy, abundance of fossil fuels, lots of sunshine, but we're not as privileged in terms of our natural water resources. So us promoting food security is a good thing, but we have to make sure that we don't transform one problem to another, where we become food secure on one hand and water insecure on another. So there's always this interdependency between energy, water, and food, which we must always take into consideration when thinking about food security. Innovation and food security, for me, is from governance to technology. We have to make sure that if we are doing agriculture and food production, we grow what makes sense for our environment in the most sustainable manner, and we resort to global trade and those crops that are difficult to grow in our environment. So there's also another relationship between security and sustainability. You may rely on the global supply chain for crops that are difficult to grow, but you need to make sure you have resilient supply chains. And when you import food, you're also importing water in the form of virtual water. So it's a very complex system. So innovation goes from governance through to technology. When designing technology, we have to design and implement technology that suits our environment. So we need to see our growing conditions, our weather conditions, our soil, what is available to us, and design and implement technology that fits. In terms of technologies, we work on designing technologies that suit or that work on water, land, that consider the atmosphere, and sometimes even underground. So from protected agriculture and greenhouses, a couple of recent innovations that we're working on, some theoretical, some moving to bench scale, and then hopefully pilot scale. We designed, for example, a greenhouse that floats on seawater, benefiting from deep, cool temperatures of the deep water to cool the greenhouse. And as a result, you can save on cooling, and by extension, you save on water. Because in our region, if you're dependent on evaporative cooling, then you need water for two things, irrigation and cooling. So as much as you can save on these two items, then you'd be doing a service to the environment. Also designing greenhouses that benefit from the cool temperature underground. You can either bury it 1.5 meters, 2 meters underground, so you partially cool the bottom layer of the greenhouse, or you can have a piping network that extends deep underground, and you can benefit from the cool air from beneath the ground to cool the greenhouse. We're also looking at air-water harvesting. We know, I mean, what is the limiting factor in our region? It's water. So as much as you can to reduce the water requirement and to find other sources of water, it's beneficial for food security. So we're trying to design an integrated greenhouse that looks at air-water harvesting for use as irrigation and considering the natural environment within the greenhouse, the microclimate, and the external climate. Light. You find that plants don't need the full spectrum of light. So if you can only transmit into the greenhouse the light that is required by the plant and reflect what is not needed, then you'd find that your cooling requirement also decreases. IoT, Internet of Things, and AI is something that is also beneficial because the more you understand the behavior of the plant, it's not just what the plant needs, but the plant is operating in a very uncertain environment. Heat fluctuations, sudden dust storms. So the more you can predict what the plant actually needs, the more you can cater exactly how much water to supply and when to supply. So these are some of the technologies we're working on in terms of greenhouses. We also look at waste. Waste is an abundant material in the environment which you can make a lot of use for. We convert waste, for example, into two things. First, you can convert agro-waste into microbial protein used for animals. And this would offset some of the fodder, or this would offset some of the fodder that would have been grown using water. So by recycling waste into protein, you can actually save water somewhere else. Conversion of waste, all kinds of waste, day pits, sewage sludge, food waste, into what we call as biochar. When mixed with soil at 1%, 2%, you can generate huge amount of savings in terms of up to 30% of water savings and 30 to 40% of agriculture productivity. This is very good for our environment. Utilizing waste is very beneficial. Carbon, for example. Carbon dioxide is an abundant waste. It's a problem. It causes global warming. If you were to capture and utilize carbon dioxide in a greenhouse, you can generate up to 30 to 40% of water savings. Plants, photosynthesis, water plus sun plus carbon dioxide. So if you give it more carbon dioxide, then you can reduce your water requirement. But if you give it too much, then you might kill it. So these are some of the things we're working on. Happily answer any questions if anyone has. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've been able to tackle this issue of food insecurity and what to do about it from different angles, and I'm going to try and summarize. Unfortunately, I think we're over time and we won't have time for questions and answers from the audience. However, again, because of the benefits of technology, we all have the Earthna app, and everybody's contacts and bios are on that app, and you can address whatever questions you might have to the different speakers. But I want to thank you very much. I just want to end by saying a few, I think, concluding remarks, I think one thing that this session has really brought to the front is the urgency of the issue of insecurity across all regions of the world, but especially in arid regions because of the special environmental concerns and so on. I think it's also brought up the importance of financing, especially in a situation where official development assistance is on the down everywhere, and there is a need to look at innovative forms of financing and to create the conditions for those kinds of financing to be able to be tapped. The other thing I think that this session has brought out is the duality of how to use new technologies, the avatars and everything, but also while using traditional knowledge and how to integrate both. I think one lesson that has come up is that clearly in order for all of this to happen, there has to be a good system of governance that is able to develop the necessary policies for all of these factors to come together. And I hope that together we will be able to work towards a world where this can be possible. I want to take this opportunity to thank Earthna, to thank all the speakers, and last but not least, draw some attention to the Earthna Prize, because I think it's very much a prize that can highlight some of the issues that we've all been talking about today. I mean, briefly, the prize was launched in 2024 with the aim of celebrating and supporting projects, actors, and systems that are working towards preservation, integration, adaptation, and adoption of ancestral knowledge and cultural heritage in addressing some of the contemporary environmental challenges that we've been talking about. 12 finalists have been selected from over 400 submissions representing 100 countries, so it's quite a big endeavor, and I thank Earthna for proposing this prize and actually implementing it. I think earlier in the day we heard from some of the finalists and some of the good work that has been done. But thank you once again. It was a pleasure to chair this session, and thank you for everything that you have, all the comments that have been made, and I think how we all were able to bring all of these different aspects of this important topic together. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. If you could please join us by sitting in your seats. ضيوفنا الكرام، يمكنكم الانضمام إلى هذه الجلسة النقاشية من خلال الجلوس في مقاعدكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. مع تسارع الجهود العالمية الرامية إلى حماية الطبيعة، تسلط هذه الجلسة الضوء على السبل التي تتيح للمجتمعات وقف استنزاف الطبيعة وعكس مساره من خلال حلول منهجية تستند إلى أسس علمية راسخة. ويعد النهج الإيجابي للطبيعة فرصة واعدة لاستعادة النظم البيئية ودعم التنوع البيولوجي وتعزيز القدرة على التكيف مع تغير المناخ، مع تحقيق منافع اقتصادية واجتماعية ملموسة في الوقت ذاته. ستتناول هذه المناقشة عدداً من المحاور الرئيسة، من بينها مفهوم النهج الإيجابي للطبيعة وسبل قياسه، والتحديات التي تواجه الكوكب مثل التلوث وتغير المناخ واستخدام الأراضي لأغراض مختلفة. كما ستتطرق إلى دور الابتكار والتمويل في تحفيز العمل البيئي واستعراض إمكانات السياحة البيئية في دعم جهود المحافظة على الطبيعة. وستتنوع وجهات النظر من بين مؤسسات دولية مرموقة وخبراء محليين، لتسلط الضوء طبعاً على مشروعات وأبحاث جارية في دولة قطر. Please join me to welcome to the stage the moderator of this interesting panel discussion, Mr. Nick Clark, Environment Editor and Anchor, Al Jazeera English.
Good to see you here. Thanks very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. It's a very important session. It's a very exciting session towards a nature-positive planet. The challenges and the opportunities. The opportunities because there are many, despite the mess that's going on in the world at the moment. It's going to be a fantastic panel. We've got a great lineup, and there'll be much to take away at the end of it. As we understand what a nature-positive planet means and what it means for us all. Now, the way it's going to work, we're going to have a couple of presentations first, and then we're going to have a panel discussion. So let's get the panel up on stage first. So I'm going to do those introductions now, and then we'll crack on with the presentations. So first up, Jane Madgwick. Jane is a distinguished ecologist and author with over 3 decades of experience in the field of wetlands and water management. If you'd like to sit here, thank you. She spent 19 years as CEO of Wetlands International and the last 2 years as Executive Director of the Global Commons Alliance. Welcome, Jane. And then we have Gretel Aguilar, who's Director General of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. 30 years of experience in conservation and sustainable development, and you are passionate about the rights of indigenous peoples and how their knowledge must be in mainstream conservation policy. Welcome. And finally, for now, Dr. Radwan Ben Hamadou, who's Director of Research, Policy and Development at our hosts, Earthna. Radwan has 20 years of experience in marine environmental management, and at Earthna, he leads initiatives to bridge academic research with policy, driving sustainability here in Qatar. Now, as I say, before we get into this discussion, we have 2 presentations. In a minute, we'll hear from former WWF Chief Marco Lambertini, who will join us on stage in about 10 minutes or so. But first, we have the world-renowned interactive artist, Thijs Beersdekker, from the Woven Foundation, who translates the complexity of science into something that people can resonate with. Thijs, over to you.
Hello. Wait, let me hide this up a bit. Is this okay? Perfect. Oh, that's an awkward picture. Let's start. Oh, here we go. So, hello, welcome. And first of all, I want to thank all of you, and especially the Earthna Foundation, and especially Dr. Gonzalo, because a year ago, he introduced me to my new mentor, a mentor that taught me how to navigate this world, this difficult world of biodiversity loss that we're facing. And over the year, she has been teaching me some really life important lessons. How to deal with resilience, how to deal with scarcity, how to deal with keeping your resources, and the moment when it rains, you actually spread your seeds, you solidify your roots, you grow. And by now, you probably figured out, I'm not talking about a person, I'm talking about a plant, kahal. And kahal, the name is Arbanabia hesdemissa. I'm not really good at pronouncing scientific names, but I'm really good at communicating science and bringing that to the heads of states and the hearts of the public. Because the issues that we're going to hear about in the next panel is going to be challenging. It's complex. And the biodiversity crisis is unimaginable. The climate crisis, the impact of that is unimaginable. The political crisis at this time is also unimaginable. And what I believe, this is her, if something is unimaginable, it becomes unactionable. So I don't believe we're only in a climate crisis, in a biodiversity crisis, a political crisis, but we are in an imagination crisis. And, well, I might be biased here, but speaking to the imagination, that's one of the core parts of art. Let me give you an example. You will notice when one tree is being cut down in your backyard, but if 1 million trees are being cut down every day in the Amazon, that's hard to imagine. So we created this sculpture together with UNESCO, and we took the data from their researchers, and every leaf that you see here disappearing, it's 100 square meters of rainforest being cut down right now in the Amazon. It's a data-driven sculpture that updates every time. It lets you imagine, it lets you understand it, it makes it relatable, and it makes you feel the data. And I think that's one of the most important things that we need to do. We need to start feeling the facts. And we need to get the facts right, because facts do not move people, emotions do. We do not live in a science-based society. We live in an emotional-driven society. And when we're talking about emotions, well, I might be biased here again, but emotions, that's the core part of art. Let me give you a small example, like a really tiny example. A small obscure research paper about how one cigarette butt, it can pollute 50 liters of water every day. So we found this paper and we started to pump around this 50 liters of water in the sculpture. It made people feel the facts. You could see the single impact of this one cigarette butt. And the research paper got read 10,000 times. The work got shared hundreds of millions of times, just by adding the emotions. And it even got shared 30 million times in Germany alone. And I don't know how you know about Germans and emotions, but I think that's a really good accomplishment. Wait. Oh, well. Sorry, there was a black slide there. So we need to teach scientists to communicate better. We need to turn the complexity of their science into a compelling worldview. If we want to move to this nature-positive world, we need strong leaders that can focalize it better. We need people to explain what's happening to our planet in a way that's relatable, accessible, understandable, personal. Because before we know it, we're walking into the supermarket and there's no chocolate anymore. Food security is going to be a big issue. And who is there to comfort us if there's no chocolate anymore, right? So with that, I'm going to show something new to you. So this is also a bit scary for me. We created a new work. You're the first ones who are going to see this. It's a work where we connected the begin and the end of a food chain, where we have the cacao tree in Indonesia. We hooked it up with sensors, And then on the other side in China, we created a digital copy of the tree. And with the data, you could see how the tree was growing in real time. How from this plantation, the air quality, the soil moist, the CO2, the change in its climate was transferred directly to its digital copy. And next to this, they're selling the actual chocolate bar. It's connecting the whole supply chain. It creates this emotional connection. And of course, this is making it relatable, understandable, and if you agree with me, it's beautiful. But beauty is not a luxury. Beauty is not valuable. Beauty is a survival strategy. Because if I go back to Cajal, her flowers are there to attract pollinators. They're there to spread the seeds, just like art can do with attracting people to spread their messages. We did the same thing at the COP15 in Montreal, where we took the negotiation data. We worked together with scientists. They put a framework on that, and based on that, you could see, oh, wait, sorry. You could see, oh, you could really see, no. Come on. Can you play the movie again? Well, you could see. So we took the data from the negotiations. We put it into the artwork, and it was moving up and down, making the policymakers a bit nervous because they saw the impact of the negotiation in real time. People came to us saying, how's the plan doing? Are we doing well? And the space around this work changed. The space around this work changed into a campfire of soft politics. Heads of state talked to the scientists directly. Policymakers mingled. And in this time of where politics are hardening, I think we need to create more spaces like this, where we can meet each other again. And I might be biased again, but I think that is one of the core functions of art at this moment. So, with that, we've solved it all. No, that's not true. I still want to stick my head in the ground. I still, who has the same feeling right now? One person? No, that's not true. Two persons. I think we can also raise our hands, because we all should stick our heads in the ground. Because under the ground, something amazing is happening. Under the ground, trees talk to each other. They share nutrients. They share warning signals. They keep each other strong and healthy as one. What you can see here is the work we created together with Stefano Mancuso, where we took the data from 2 pines and we trained 2 AIs to communicate with each other like you were there under the ground with them, moving from one side to the other. This is really weird, sorry for this. We did do the testing. Oh, yeah. So you could see it moving. This is 12 meters wide. And you could see the sap flows. You can see how they communicate with each other. And if you were there in the room and you were breathing, it made you a part of the work itself, making you feel part of something bigger. And I think with that, that is our most important lesson today. That is what the whole nature positive movement is doing. That is creating something that we want to belong to. So if we can listen to Cajal, wait for the right moment, when it's raining, when it's going dark, in this time, she will let go of her seeds, spreads her knowledge, solidifies its roots when it rains. And I think today, globally, it's raining. So I think the moment for this nature positive movement is now. Thank you.
Thijs Beerstek, everybody, fantastic. I think in this area where communication and science is pretty stuck, that was a wonderful demonstration of making the intangible tangible and the remote seem close. Just a very quick question, Thijs. Do you have any metrics or any means of kind of measuring the response you get to your art and how popular it's become and the impact it might have?
Well, I think one side of it is always how many visitors, how many people. Then online it spreads millions and millions of times more. But I do think everything matters. So it doesn't matter how big or small, but if it fits this ecosystem of communication, if it fits this ecosystem of what everybody is doing here today, we need to find ways to, different angles to communicate the importance. And I think art has speaking to the imagination has one of the most urgent topics, but I might be biased there.
Yeah, as you say, because today it's raining.
Yeah.
All right, Thijs, thanks very much indeed. And if you want to see more of Thijs in about an hour's time, he'll be on the Agora stage with me and another panel if you'd like to see more. So thanks very much indeed. Okay, so now let's welcome Marco Lambertini onto the stage. Marco ran the WWF organization from, 2014 to 23. Before that, he was global director at BirdLife International, and now the convener of the Nature Positive Initiative. He has had a lifetime in conservation, and we're very lucky to be able to hear from Marco. Over to you.
Nick, thank you so much. First of all, lovely to be on stage with you, and thank you to Earthna for the invitation. Having said that, if I knew I was going to speak after an artist presentation, probably I would have reconsidered my participation. I'm joking. This is a super exciting opportunity to talk about the concept of nature positive in this region of the world. So let me just start by saying, ladies and gentlemen, that I believe we're living truly in extraordinary times, times of paradoxes, times of crises, challenges, and also, of course, times of opportunities too. And the opportunity for this generation, not the next one, for this generation of living humans, is to avoid what scientists call planetary tipping points, points of no return where the Earth system will start behaving differently from what they've been doing until now, and embrace a turning point instead in our relationship, the most important relationship of all, our relationship with nature, our mother, our lifeline, our major contributor to our health, happiness, and prosperity. In the last 200 years, actually in the last 70 years, particularly after the end of the Second World War, humanity has embarked on an incredible journey of astonishing progress in so many different ways, technological, but also in terms of quality of life. Of course, inequitably distributed around the world, but if you think about the beginning of the 20th century, where 40% of newborns didn't reach the age of puberty, where the average life expectancy was below 50 years, and now the child mortality is less than 5%, and life expectancy over 70. If you look at the fact that 75% of people, again at the beginning of the 20th century, were in dire poverty, and today that figure is 10%. Still unacceptable, but major progress around the world. GDP from 9 trillion to 100 trillion. Humanity has developed in an incredible way. Population, of course, as a consequence, boosted. When I was born, we were about not even 3 billion people on the planet. In my own lifetime, we tripled, almost. Economic growth in many regions of the world, again, with a lot of inequality, unfortunately, but overall, we can say that probably there's never been a better time for humans on this planet. But all this was hiding, maybe conveniently or inadvertently, a darker side. And the darker side is what has happened to nature. In other words, we've been developing and conquering all these major improvements at the expenses of the natural world. This is an economy that has thrived over the consumption and the utilization of natural resources, nature services, but at the same time destroying them. It's an economy that is destroying its own foundation. That cannot go on for much longer. So the great rise of humanity has been paralleled by the great decline of nature. And this is the paradox, the development paradox of today. The paradox that we need to come to terms with and embrace in terms of moving to a different model. And today, as a consequence of that, this is what the world looks like. These colors are not random. These colors actually replicate exactly, over the years, in the last 50 years, the increase of global temperatures and the decrease of abundance of life, of biodiversity on the planet. That's what the world that we made in less than 50 years, hotter and with less life. And climate change and nature loss are the two interconnected dimensions that are reinforcing each other. Climate change is driving nature loss is exacerbating climate change. And if you think that 90% of the heat that we produce with our cars, industrial activities, air condition, heating around the world, 54%, more than half of all the CO2 emissions that we emit with our activities have been until now neutralized by nature. Imagine if nature loses the ability to contribute in this way. The planet will become very quickly a very difficult place for us. Now, this is the doom and gloom, but actually this is science speaking today. In all this, there is a positive side. And the positive side is that today we know. Today we know much more than we ever known about all this. Impacts, consequences. Today we are the most environmentally aware generation of all time. And in that awareness lies hope and lies, of course, the change, the seed for change. This is not NGOs or green movements survey. This is the World Economic Forum global risk analysis they do every year. And this year, in January, you can see on a 10-year horizon, which is really not very long term, half of the risks are environmental. And the two top risks identified by business and society are climate change, extreme weather events, and biodiversity loss. So we are at an inflection point where the world has also agreed, and this is a great sign of that awareness, has agreed that we need to embark a carbon neutral, net zero emissions, and a nature positive, net positive biodiversity. Because for nature, net zero is not good enough. Nature can come back if you give it a chance. We have so many examples around the world. And that's the, if you like, double compass that will drive our society through a safer and sustainable future. And we know what to do. We need to protect more of the nature left to the planet, and we need to restore what we can, what we destroyed or degraded. The target the world gives itself is 30%, but we know that we need to protect more than that over time. The most challenging part is that in order to achieve that, we need to transition economic sectors that today are nature negative into nature positive ones. Top of the list, agriculture, the way we produce food, fishing, forestry, extractive infrastructures. And finally, we need to redirect financial flows, public and private, to support those transitions. Today, we are spending almost 3 trillion per year in subsidizing activities which are harmful to climate and nature. 3 trillion. You know, it's more than all the global military spending. Is like we are waging a war on nature, like if nature is our worst enemy. And just conclude, in order to achieve the goal of climate, carbon neutrality and net zero emissions, we have all the tools that we need. We have identified a clear metric, we have identified the goal, it is measurable. We can track progress in that direction. And in fact, we know that we are behind, but at least we know that we are behind. On nature, the picture is much more complex, fragmented. There are too many metrics, there are too many ways of measuring biodiversity recovery and biodiversity loss. And I think we need to move into a much better balance between having metrics that drive action, that are science-based and credible, but also practical, understandable. Back to Ty's point, try not to make nature even more complex than actually it is. And there are metrics, and there is a process now, in fact, both Jane and Gretel as part of this process, to try to align on a number of metrics that can help society, governments, communities, business, investors to measure their contribution to nature positive. And let me finish with this quote that you may have heard before, because it's a very famous quote. It was Winston Churchill, I think, in 1936, when basically, Britain decided to get into Second World War and at the start of the... But if you read this same sentence, not thinking of the Second World War in 1936, but actually thinking about the situation we are today in relation with nature, it's exactly the same thing. Past neglect, ignoring plainest warning that nature is sending us every day. The era of procrastination and half measures is gone, must go. And in its place, we are entering a period of consequences. That's, for me, is the perfect quote to end the presentation with an invitation to act, an invitation to embrace change. Because it's the great rise of humanity and the great decline of nature that has paralleled that, has now brought us to what we can call the great threat that we're facing, but also the great awareness of that threat. Today, we are at the point of inflection. Today is the time of the great choice. Choice that could stick to the nature negative direction, or a choice that can embrace the great transition to a nature positive future. Because, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, there is not going to be any other way to secure a people-positive future unless we embrace a nature-positive one. Thank you.
Marco Lambertini, everybody. So, Marco, we're just going to bring you into the fold of the conversation. So please take a seat. The time for harsh measures is gone. Okay, Jane, I'd like to start with you. As part of this whole nature-positive movement, we have planetary boundaries. Can you tell us a little bit about them? You worked alongside others, I think, on this breakthrough science. And the point is it limits what in an ideal world barriers that we shouldn't cross to ensure a stable planet, I think. So explain that a bit more for us, and how can nature-positive strategies help countries stay inside those boundaries?
Thanks, Nick, and also very grateful to be back here in Doha in this summit. Yeah, planetary boundaries isn't a new concept. It's been around 15 years now, I think. I mean, that's a very simple concept, and that people depend on nature and natural resources for food, water, etc. But there's a limit to what the Earth can give. So that idea has been around for a while. What's relatively new is to really be precise about what these limits are, and what is really safe for the planet. If you forget about humans for a while and just, what will allow the planet to go on in a reasonably stable, resilient condition. But also adding to that, what do people need in this planet? And so in the last 2 years, the science has evolved dramatically to give us really the metrics on what's safe for the planet and what's also just, in the sense of what are the requirements of nature and the natural systems, the thresholds, not just climate, but all the natural systems alongside, which we need to get to in order that we can have a prosperous, safe, and equitable future for everyone on the planet. So we now know those numbers, we now know those metrics. So in a way, there's no excuse. We know the destination, we know the size of the landing strip. And
the size of the landing strip is actually pretty small.
It's getting smaller all the time.
I mean,
and yeah. So there are many layers to explain, but we are outside 6 of the 9 critical natural systems.
So the wrong side.
The wrong
of the
side.
Boundary.
Yeah, we're in the red zone of 6 of those, and critically, there are 9 systems, but 2 of them are more important than the others, because in combination or by themselves, they can push the whole planet off into a catastrophic decline. So one being climate, which we know, climate change, we're going fast in the wrong direction, crossing that threshold. But the second one, just as important, is the condition of the biosphere. That's the thin living strip that's on the planet. And as Marco mentioned, these 2 interact. So we can't solve the climate problem. We can't limit climate change without restoring the condition of nature on the planet. Actually, all the climate models and their predictions that are out there are based on the assumption that nature didn't decline. Well, nature is accelerating in decline. And so it's not surprising that what we now see and witness in terms of the indicators of climate change are more severe than those models were predicting. And the biosphere is really the key also for humanity. So what the planet needs, what's very interesting on the metrics, what the planet needs in terms of intact, functional, genetically diverse nature is pretty close to what people need as well. So this should dispel this whole idea that, yes, it's nice and good to do something for nature, but isn't it more important to look after the development of people? These two are really dependent on the same natural resources.
They go hand in hand. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a lot of controversy about this concept of inventing systems that can draw CO2 out of the atmosphere. It already exists. It's there in the natural world, right?
Yes, nature is supreme technology in terms of pulling carbon out of the air or keeping carbon in the ground in the terms of wetlands. So most people know, even if they don't understand the science, that cutting down trees, especially in the tropical forest, is a bad thing for the climate. But I would say equally drainage of wetlands is extremely bad. That's releasing enormous amounts of carbon into the air in terms of carbon dioxide and methane. Just simple drainage, which was not long ago thought as a good thing for development. And now there's a whole business at reversing drainage to restore nature and natural functioning and draw the carbon out of the air.
Okay, Gretel, I'd like to bring you in. So we have this nature positive vision, but it is, I mean, given the state of the planet, it is systemic change on a massive scale, isn't it? How is the IUCN helping countries translate that aim into reality? That's the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, of which you are the boss.
Thank you very much. And please allow me first to thank Earthna Qatar Foundation and Gonzalo Castro for the kind invitation to be here. In terms of IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, you know, first I have to say that nature positive is not just an environmental necessity, but it's a social and an economic imperative. So what we are hearing here is not just about environment and about saving, you know, the trees and saving the species. It's about us. It's about us humans. And if we think, you know, if we think about in practical terms, what do we need to do? Yes, we know that the planet is in a pretty bad shape. Marco just explained that. We know that there are solutions. We have, I don't know how many conferences of the parties of the many different international conventions. We have heard the speeches many times. So why is it that we're not doing it? You know, it's the question that I think we all need to ask ourselves. If we know the state of the planet, if we know what we need to do, why we're not doing it? We are intelligent people.
Why do you think it is?
I think, honestly, that first of all, we need to put the problems in simple words and explain to the massive population and not just stay with a few that will understand the complicated things. Second, and this is where IUCN comes, I think we have to bring the tools and explain those tools in a very simple and clear way. You know, if we're going to talk about, one of the tools that IUCN has, for example, is a nature-based solution standard. But if I say nature-based solutions standard, I want to know how many here in the room understand what is that. Oh. Okay, I see a few hands here, good. But not many, not all the room. And it's very simple. It's just nature-based solution is how nature itself is helping us. So for example, if we conserve mangroves, what are we gaining? What are we gaining? Are we gaining, that mangroves absorb carbon and the planet can be in better shape? Are we gaining that our fishermen will be in a better place? Are we gaining security for our coastal systems? So yes, we need a standard. Why? Because we don't want to say that everything that we do will help nature. So when we talk about nature-based solutions, being these restoring ecosystems by planting trees or saving mangroves, we need to know that this is the right thing to do. And that's why we have a standard. Also, IUCN is well known by the red list of threatened species. Many of you have seen this. We are the ones who tell the world what species are about to disappear and what species are doing well. But if I tell you here that the Arabian oryx, which is from this region, or the sea dugong, is doing well or not, then you will understand that we can put all the species of this planet and tell you how are they doing. But more importantly, we can tell you how to save them. Mm-hmm. So we have many of these tools that we use in IUCN. We also put together a red list of ecosystems. So today, we can tell any country how many and what type of ecosystems you have for what, to help the countries plan, to help the countries say, okay, I have this and this and this and this other type of ecosystem. I can plan, I can make economic sense of my decisions, and I can put nature at the center of the country's planning, not just at the center of a Minister of Environment or Climate Change, but at the center of the decision-taking of a country. Because we depend on nature for food security, for the air we breathe, for health, for so many things that we don't see, normally. We take many things for granted, but actually, nature is our best ally. Right.
So good for the planet, but good for humanity too. And Gretel there, Radwan, mentioned 3 species that are pertinent to where we are right now here in Qatar with the dugong, the oryx, and indeed mangroves, and mangrove restoration projects is what's happening here in Qatar. It's very important. And I guess it's important to put a lens on nations like Qatar, because it can give a valuable insight into what nature positive means in countries that are not considered to be, mega diverse.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nick. And in the name of Earthna, welcome everyone. Definitely, Qatar might not be considered a mega diverse in terms of number of species, but the ecosystems that we do have here and some of these species that are living on them are unique and valuable, and I will explain why. First, the country is under a big environmental stress. It's a arid, high temperature, extreme salinity in the marine environment, but still life is there. From resilient coral reefs or seagrasses, from, as it was mentioned, for very salt-tolerant mangroves, we do have a resistance and an adaptation that went through thousands of years that created some ecosystems that are thriving under conditions that elsewhere they would not be surviving. We do have corals that survive 36 degrees in the water. That's for other places in the world that's not possible. Even if we have the hottest sea in the world, during the summer, we have the biggest aggregation of whale sharks that are in the world that are appearing here in Qatar. We have the second largest aggregation of dugongs. So life is thriving here, but what we can understand is that adaptation, that is the highest and the richest value that we can get from our nature here. So positive nature in Qatar is not just saving the species or halting their loss, but it's also preserving those adaptation strategies, those biological processes that resulted in such adaptation, so that other places also in the world can understand how those happened, and we can help in assisted evolution, for example, and helping them adapting to the future climate conditions.
Marco, what do you make of that and everything that Radwan is saying there, especially this concept of thousands, millions of years of evolution, and yet what you're talking about has got to be done a lot quicker, isn't it?
Yes, but I think what you were discussing with Gretel about why we are not taking care of nature is really the question. And I can try to give two perspectives on this. The first one is something that goes back to our origin. Because let's not forget, for 99%, maybe even more, of our history as a species, as humans on the planet, we've been living in a nature which was dominant, was super rich, but also was very tough. I mean, it's not a coincidence, it's not by chance that we decided to extract ourselves from nature. Begin to build huts first, and then houses, and then cities, and then... Because living in nature is super tough. And as I said earlier, it's just the last 200 years that we begin to actually, reduce our threat from malnutrition, diseases, starvation, all the things that were absolutely the norm until, just a fraction of the time we've been on the planet. So this being, and back to Gretel's point, you use this word, take for granted. This is exactly what's happening. On one hand, nature, is nice, but, let's keep it outside our houses, or maybe bring in some flowers just to look good. But actually, we are taking nature for granted because nature has always been there for us. Now that nature is declining, we are struggling to internalize all that, and we continue to take nature for granted, as if nature is infinitely resilient, if the natural resources are infinite, as if at the end of the day, nature will come back and will continue to provide for us. Science is telling us there are moments, and that was Jane was talking about, the tipping points. Those are something new. Nick, we never experienced, nobody in 4 billion years of life on Earth, there's never been a situation like this, where actually one species is driving entire systems to change, and then suffering as a consequence, which is, of course, the crazy part of it. But if you think about, so that's one first thing is culturally. We need to stop taking nature for granted, understand that if we do affect nature beyond a certain limit, we'll pay a dear price. The last thing, very quickly, is actually about the economic system. So today, nature, if you think about it, is valued economically only when it's dead. A tree standing in a forest counts nothing. As soon as you cut it, it becomes valuable. A fish swimming in the ocean, maintaining the ecological balance that you were talking about in the sea, counts nothing until it's fished and served on a dish. So we just need to turn on its head the way we value nature, living nature, as much as the nature that we use and utilize, because we will continue to utilize nature as well. Living nature has no value today, in fact, even a negative value, because, as I said earlier, we subsidize activities that destroy nature. So it's just complete paradox of, we depend on nature, and yet we don't value it, and we destroy it with no cost.
The kind of seismic change you're talking about, it needs government policy. It needs a lot of reversal of government policies as well that are already in place. And unless, Jane, you have government setting ambitious policies to restore and protect nature, you're not going to get ultimately what's required. Where is the money? You won't get the private investment that's needed because the governments don't seem to have the money these days, right?
Yeah, but that's a question, as Marco was saying, about what we value and what we really understand. So if the real dependency on nature was really understood and factored into all government decision-making investments, we would be investing heavily in nature right now because the numbers are there. the fact is we just blind to those numbers. And yeah, we protect ourselves from the extreme events. So yeah, it's an interesting question, because I heard this morning someone say that managing climate was a global issue, but nature is really a local issue. And bringing back nature is really a local, community-led activity, and it needs to stay there. So I really believe in community-led nature conservation restoration, absolutely, but restoring the condition of the biosphere is a global responsibility. It's a global phenomenon that's happening, you know, and these tipping points like the Amazon forest, the Congo, the wetlands around the world, for example, when these tip, that has global consequences. The responsibility to prevent that happening is global, I believe, whilst the actors who will take that and put that into practice, they are local. They are living in, for example, Brazil for the Amazon, and they have the rights and the responsibilities there. But the global community needs to take its responsibility to enable that to happen. And so what is really needed in the sense of a global effort is to connect all the local efforts around the world, the sum of that to be a massive and rapid shift in a different direction. And yes, that's going to take some kind of big multilateral push. We've got the Global Biodiversity Framework. It says all the right things. It's not moving fast enough. But that framework is already a big step forward. It's now going to take a big push from civil society, working with cities, with companies, and with countries all together to turn that around.
But where is that momentum going to come from? I hate to say it. You know,
come back to Tice's
well,
presentation.
exactly. But with the situation in the United States, with the rollback of all environmental policy right now and the loss of momentum there, at this moment, and given the urgency of what we're talking about, where does it leave us?
Well, the United States is an important, powerful country, but it is only one part of the world. There is huge momentum growing for better managing our land and water and natural resources all over the world. And civil society is moving that. Public opinion needs to be lifted with messages of, with hope, with inspiration, supported by the tools and methods that they're there. We know what needs to be done, how to do it. But there isn't that real push yet, as you said. But that needs to rise up, and that will push public policy.
Okay. Gretel, do you want to come in on that?
Thank you. Well, you know, once I met these scientists who study other planets, climate in other planets, I thought that was incredible. And I asked him a question. It's true that there is no planet B. And he said, oh, why are you asking that question? Because you study the planets. And he says, well, actually, of course, there are other planets and we are studying them, but it will take us millions and millions of years to get there. But the most important thing he says is, you should not be asking that question because we have the perfect planet. And this planet was created for us, humans. And I always remember this, because when we talk about what do we need and what can we do to save our planet, and then we see the geopolitical situation today. I think that we're just losing the focus. I mean, it doesn't matter what geopolitically is happening now. Matter of fact is that if we as a society, as a planetary society, each of us don't take action, there will be no geopolitics because there will be no planet. So for me, just to see the attention of the world putting in what is going on in the United States, I'm sorry to say it, but I think we're losing the focus. We should be acting as one huge, big society that wants to have a planet where we can all thrive. It's not so difficult. Of course that I am not unrealistic. There are things happening, and it's not just in one country, it's in many countries that bad things are happening. But my motto is that we have to stay positive. And how do we stay positive? In believing, and I think that many of you will join me, that we still have an incredible, beautiful planet that supports us, that give us still, even we are treating the planet badly, we have a planet that still gives us goods and services that we are benefiting even today. We're speaking here, but we still have water, we still have many things. Yes, they are at risk, but let's take what we have and let's make it better, and let's not lose the focus. It is important not to deviate, by distractions while we achieve what we have to achieve, because it's about our own survival. And let me just bring to the table something that we have not discussed, which is the role of local communities and indigenous peoples, the people who are at the front line of these things. It's not necessarily it's not me necessarily, the ones who are here. It's the people who are on the ground, living the effects of climate change every day. It's the people who need healthy land for agriculture, to eat every day. Those are the ones who are at the front line. Sometimes we don't pay attention, but those are the same ones who are innovating and who are learning from the past, but also innovating for the future, and are bringing solutions that we need to look at and that we need to value. And that's why I like the Earthna Prize. And when Gonzalo invited me, I have to confess that I don't participate of these reviews normally, but when he mentioned it's about traditional knowledge, I couldn't resist. Because if we just take time to respect and learn from our people, the people who are there on the ground, I think that we will be amazing, all of us. So to value traditional knowledge, to innovate, to take that traditional knowledge and mix it with innovation, we have it all. We have to see it, and we have to be positive and think that we can, turn the tide and make it possible.
Yeah, well said. Radwan, Gretel there was talking about innovation and solutions. Tell us about some of the innovation solutions that are ongoing in Qatar with some of the projects that are happening in terms of ecosystem restoration, the mangroves and so forth.
Yeah, definitely Qatar is a kind of open sky stress testing lab, because as I mentioned, for example, we do have the hottest sea in the world here. So the harsh conditions that we are already experiencing in Qatar are the ones that other countries will be facing in the upcoming decades. So the research that we are doing here, the understanding of these mechanisms of adaptation that happened during those thousands of years, to understand how they happened here and try to make them happening in a faster way so that the species can cope with the changes that are happening with the climate change, could be one of those contributions of the research and the development and the innovation that is being done here in Qatar. And it's not, and it's for exactly that perspective that we are teaming with different companies that are developing their technologies for restoration here in Qatar. Why? Because they know that this is a very good place to prove the proof of concept for their technologies, because if it works here, it would be working in other places in the world, even if always the solutions should be context specific. But still, in terms of how harsh are the conditions here we have in Qatar, the conservation or restoration technologies that you are developing here, you may be able to replicate them in a more effective way in other places in the world. So that's something also that we design, for example, artificial reefs, functional artificial reefs. We add, for example, on those artificial reefs, sexual and asexual propagation of species, the ones that are coral species, the ones that are the most resilient, that we go and collect when all the species are bleaching and you have only 5% of that reef that is not bleached. You collect some of those genotypes that are the most resilient, you propagate them sexually in the lab, and from that one colony you create thousands, if not already now, millions.
And then you could export them to other areas where perhaps they've lost their coral because of rising temperatures, and you then have corals that can deal with those kind of conditions.
Sure, you have some consideration to take so that you are not introducing new species or whatever, but what definitely in light of what you said, for example, the same species, which is Platygyra daidalia that we have here and we have in Oman, the same species have been crossbred in our labs here in Qatar, and from the father here from Qatar and the mother from Oman, and we demonstrated that the babies are more heat tolerant than the babies coming directly from Oman. What it means that this adaptation is vertically transmitted, so that you can use definitely some of our species to help other similar species in other places in the world developing breeds that are able to resist the heat that they will be facing in the future.
Fascinating. Marco, I want to just talk briefly, we're coming towards the end, we've got 8 or 9 minutes, perhaps a bit less than that. Just about the political process, because at the moment we have 2 prongs, don't we? We've got 2 COPs going on, the climate, these big summits that happen every year. So you've got the climate summit, and then you have the biodiversity summit, 2 distinct prongs. But what you're all saying is that this is entwined, and it should be one process. And as we know, both those processes, and I've reported on many of them, are stultifying in their progress. I mean, there have been advances in 2015, with Paris was one of them. But isn't there a need to streamline things now?
Yes, I hope my UN friends won't take objection for what I'm saying. I think obviously yes, right? What we mentioned earlier, the connection between climate, and by the way, climate, nature and development, water security, health, food security, I mean, health, it's all part of the same agenda. That's why the beauty of the SDG is actually the framework that was tried to, for the first time, bring everything together. But I go back to the point Thijs was mentioning earlier on. When something becomes or is presented as too complicated, people switch off. And that's a human thing. And so, yes, coordination, yes, integration, yes, synergies, but let's not also be careful not to make a big, I can use this word without offending my own country, a spaghetti bowl, of everything together, then now we understand what to do because it's all. So humans are so good at solving one problem at a time, at focusing one thing, finding a solution. They're not very good at looking aside and connecting the dots. We need to do that increasingly. So, long answer to your question. Yes, we need more integration, but also let's not underestimate the power of the decisions and the plans that we already have agreed to. Nick, today, the most important thing is to deliver what we already agreed. A decarbonized economy and an economy which is going to deliver more nature, not less. This has been agreed by 200 countries a few years ago on both sides, biodiversity and climate. So we've got to deliver that. The plan is there. We've got to deliver it. And then the question is why we are not delivering it, because we just do not feel the pressure yet. But let's be honest, system change in our economy, society, in the way we live our life will happen. It's inevitable. The question is, do we want to choose ourselves to change, or do we want the change to be imposed by us, by nature? Because nature is lovely, but can be terrifying as well. And so, on that note, I hope it's not a negative one, but I mean, I'm saying, let me finish with another thing, which is a bit more positive. But honestly, we are playing with fire, literally. The nature reaction will be terrifying if you're not careful. But we have all the means, intellectually, We understand. We have the financial resources. We have the technology. We have all the means to deliver what we already agreed to deliver, a carbon neutral, energy positive world. It's time to do it.
Okay. Jane, final word to you. A call to arms. It's change on a huge scale, but the upside is also colossal, right?
It's colossal, but it's also a pretty exciting challenge. You know, we've got a short time to make massive transformation. We've got the science. What we need now is a bit of artistry to go with it, to come back to where we started this session. Because looking forward and planning forward, this needs to be a creative process. We can't put nature back, restore it how it was, like you restore a painting or something, because it's not static. It's continually evolving. So we have to create the new landscapes, the new cities of the future with all that evolution in mind, with all the different needs and how they're going to develop, with how climate is going to develop, all of this in mind. And this is a real creative challenge. So I'm really happy that here there's a big focus on architecture for the future and the idea of learning from the traditions of the past, but actually bringing that together with cutting-edge science and innovation to create, you know, new cities and extended cities which really take into account the needs of people. What we need to add to that is not only the needs of the local people, but the needs of the local environment and the nature and the natural systems.
All right, brilliant. Thank you very much. That's all we've got time for. Jane Madgett, Marco Lambertini, Greta Aguilar, and Radwan Ben Hamadou, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.